Hello, YouTube. There are many things that we do not know about our mysterious past, about the history of our planet. And as truth seekers, we think it's important to keep an open mind and embrace all possibilities, as far-fetched as some may seem. So it is believed that telescopes were invented in the 17th century in Holland, and Galileo became the first active user of them. And we'll describe a little bit more later. However, ancient lenses were created much earlier. For example, a carefully crafted lens created before our era, before Common Era, is kept in the Cairo Museum. Look at the attached photos. And the other photo shows a piece of ancient Greek mosaic depicting a man with a telescope. Did telescopes really exist in ancient times? Look at the drawing. On this drawing, you can see a stone found in Peru. And look what it depicts. And can you see an ancient Arab astronomer? Can you see the Shumer telescope? Look at the drawings made in the Middle Ages. And then there are some drawings from the 19th century, and this is how the artist represented the famous observatory in Alexandria. Studying the past, scientists are increasingly convinced that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge that from the standpoint of modern science, they simply could not have. Maybe according to the fashionable hypothesis, these unknown aliens were engaged in educational work on Earth, and I presented a number of videos about such hypotheses. Or maybe simply our ancestors were much smarter than we imagined them to be. It has always been believed, and still is believed, that the first telescopes were made in Holland, like I said, at the end of the 17th century. However, recent research by German scientists may force us to reconsider this date. If their assumption is correct, then everything suggests that back in the 11th century, the Vikings used optical devices that became the progenitors of modern telescopes. The objects which now have been identified as lenses were discovered at the site of the ancient navigators on the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. And trust me, I have more to tell you about Gotland, but about a different phenomenon. And I will, and I'm not going to take too much time about it. And you can read more about the Baltic Sea anomalous and strange phenomena in my book, Russia's USO Secrets. And I've told you more in my other videos. Anyway, for a long time, these lenses from Gotland have been lying in the storerooms of the local museum and have always been considered to be simple decorations. True, scientists did not understand what or whom these objects decorated. The first interest in them was shown decades ago by Dr. Karl Heinz Wilms when he was looking for exhibits for the Munich Museum. After seeing the illustrations in the book, he intended to study the original in more detail, but at that time it was not possible to do this. And then a series of other urgent matters piled on Wilms, and the trip to Gotland was postponed all the time. Only 7 years later, Wilms' colleagues went to the island. They studied 10 subjects and were shocked by the first data they received. Made of rock crystal, they had such a regular elliptical shape, and their surface was processed so qualitatively, in such quality, that it aroused involuntary respect for the skill of ancient grinders. Even after centuries, they performed their functions perfectly. According to experts, it is possible to make such a part only on a rotating lathe, which does not exist at that time. Let me describe it in more details. The Visby lenses are a collection of high-quality optical lenses found on the Swedish island of Gotland in 1999. They are named after the city of Visby, the largest city in Gotland, though most of them come from the region of rurcla. Dating from the 11th to 12th century, the quartz lenses are roughly dome-shaped and come in a variety of sizes, the largest measuring 50 millimeters in diameter and 32.1 millimeters deep at the center. All these lenses show a waviness on the surfaces, which may have been due to repair or bad polishing. Some lenses show evidence of having been reshaped slightly, possibly in order to mount the lenses in the silver filigree that makes them so distinctive. The collection at Frogel also included pieces of rock crystal, the raw material for the lenses, as well as beads. Still more pieces of the collection are missing and unfortunately appear to have been lost. See, the Visby lenses resemble the quartz reading stones invented by the Andalusian polymath Abbas ibn Firnas in the late 1st millennium AD, though their silver mounts are what make the Gotlandic examples really stand out. This has led to the speculation that the lenses themselves were manufactured in the Byzantine or Islamic world and then imported to Scandinavia and modified after the Norse fashion, or possibly that a Viking or a Varangian had learned how to make them on their own travels to the east. Lenses of this type have a variety of uses. Most prominently, they can be used as magnifying glasses to allow the reading fine texts. That's why the name reading stones. Examination of small details in a variety of objects, or to allow a craftsman to create extremely fine detail in their work. By focusing light, they could also have been used to start fires or to cauterize wounds or cuts to prevent infections. Given the silver filigree mounts, they may even have been additionally worn as decoration. Scandinavians of this time were known to have had practical jewelry. Some examples include ornate brooches, which doubled as boxes that women could keep things in, weighted arm rings in silver that could be hacked apart for currency, and ornate house keys that served as personal adornment, a marker of status, and also, a key to the house. The Visby lenses may have fit into the same category as practical artifacts with an additional decorative function. Well, remarkably, when compared to modern optical lenses of the same style, the Visby lenses were almost perfect. In terms of image quality, the ancient version was only slightly worse than the modern version. This is impressive, for this was at a time when formalized mathematics had not yet calculated the perfect proportions of such a lens. The maker of the lenses must have used trial and error until perfecting this shape. The resulting lenses were thus not created by accident, nor by formula, but by dedicated mastery. This master craftsman could have brought the science of optics and refraction centuries forward if they had passed their knowledge on, but unfortunately this does not appear to have come to pass. We just don't know enough. We think so. The Visby lenses are anomalous in this, indicating that the knowledge of their manufacture was apparently lost, and it would not be rediscovered for centuries. The origin of the lenses is really still unclear. Because they appeared and then disappeared so suddenly in the Norse world, it does make this case a little more confusing. The presence of unfinished stones and raw material in the collection suggests that there was some local manufacture going on, but did a Gotlander acquire the first lenses through trade or loot, later giving them to local craftsmen to modify and replicate? Had an Islamic or Byzantine craftsman traveled and settled in Gotland to ply his trade abroad? But it seems clear to some scientists that the Vikings did not make the lenses themselves. There are hints that they may have been manufactured in this ancient empire of Byzantium, modern Istanbul, or in the region of Eastern Europe where Scandinavian Vikings are known to have participated in trade networks? Or was Gotland home to a once-in-a-millennium master inventor who took all these secrets to his grave? The possibilities are many, and it's a little bit blurry right now at the moment. Adding to the fact that some of the pieces have been lost, our best bet at the moment is to hope that someday we will find out. Maybe there will be a connection. Well, some of the lenses can be seen in the Fornsal Historical Museum in Visby. Some are in the Swedish National Museum in Stockholm. Well, historians found drawings of telescopes in the manuscripts of Leonardo da Vinci, but the first telescope was made in 1608 by the Dutch master optician Hans Lippersgree, and the following year, the Italian physicist, mechanic, and astronomer Galilei used the telescope for the first time to observe the starry sky. But it turns out that the ancient master craftsmen, also had the opportunity to make a primitive telescope tube. This is very interesting. And if we can say, for example, that in the tomb of Tutankhamun, who lived 33 centuries ago, glasses were discovered, two thin emerald lenses, for example. This we should bring to our story Professor Robert Temple. He's a member of the Royal Astronomical Society and the Society for Egyptian Research, who has lectured for a long time in the United States and China, and is a member of numerous scientific societies. In one of the Egyptian tombs for the period of the ancient kingdom in Egypt, a richly decorated knife with an ivory handle was discovered, but the scientist was interested in another element, the microscopic carving that connects its parts. It is impossible to make such without really strong magnification. Furthermore, in various museums around the world, Temple discovered, I think, 450 ancient legends, included in collections dating back from 2500 BC. But it seems that they are not being noticed by science. There were interesting statues found while doing archaeological work in Egypt from the 4th, 5th, and I believe 3rd dynasties. And they were convex crystal lenses, perfectly polished. They increased the size of the pupils and gave the statues a revived look. I think there was quite an abundance of such found in Egypt in quantities, but you can read about them in books on Egyptology and see it in the museums. So it seems like the Eye of Horus was also some kind of optical device. There are some more interesting facts, like about the Emperor Nero, 1st century AD, who watched the fights of gladiators through a polished emerald. Again, emeralds. And in the Cairo Museum, there is a lens made of glass and rock crystal, as I mentioned before. All these creations of ancient men, we're looking at several millennia old. Among the most ancient optical glasses is a lens from ancient land of Mesopotamia, from Nimrud, actually dating from 2700 BC. It has an almost oval shape and rough grinding. It has a threefold increase. I believe it was discovered in 1853 by Henry Layard. I think he suggested it was a magnifying glass. However, It also could be used as an incendiary glass to produce fire. But the famous Italian scientist Giovanni Pettinato suggested that the lens was used by ancient Assyrians in the simplest telescope. By the way, Ivan Yefremov, I mention him quite often. In his book, he also talked about ancient Babylonian lens. And I will mention this source a little bit later. So this fact supposedly explains why these people have such extensive information about celestial objects in ancient Mesopotamia. At the same time, many experts reject this hypothesis, referring to the lack of description of the telescope in ancient Assyrian treatises on astronomy. It is also known that in ancient manuscripts on astronomy, there are drawings of the rings of Saturn and its 5 main moons, as well as images of the moons of Jupiter and the 2 small moons of Mars. Remember them? Phobos and Deimos. You can look at my videos about this artificial creation of unknown civilization. At the same time, a number of researchers claim that they can be seen with the naked eye. Nevertheless, many scientists are inclined to think that for a clear observation of the rings and moons of Saturn, a telescope with lenses about 13 centimeters in diameter is still needed, or even with lenses up to 10 centimeters in diameter. However, archaeologists for a long time could not find even minor fragments of a telescope made in ancient times. And there are quite logical explanations for this. After all, even if such tools did exist several millennia ago, they were very rare due to the special complexity of their manufacture. So they could hardly have survived to our time. Therefore, for archaeologists, an antique telescope is an incredible event. However, the absence of finds of an ancient telescope does not prove that such devices did not exist. In Knossos, Crete, Minoan kingdom, as it turned out, lenses were made in such quantities that they even managed to find a real workshop of the Minoan era for their production. A lens was found in Knossos Palace back in 1921 by the famous archaeologist Evans. The discoverer of this object and several more lenses a few years later by Fosdijk at the Mavrospelio Cemetery, and it was this archaeologist who first suggested they could have an optical application. And interestingly, several more lenses found in Amatos near Limassol during the excavations of the temple of Aphrodite, among other small gifts to the goddess, gems, beads, amulets, probably refers to archaic ancient Greece. That is, from 8 to 6 centuries BC. The lens and rock crystal from the palace of Knossos has a diameter of 14 millimeters and 11-fold magnification. The reverse side is silver foil, and therefore it was assumed that it was some kind of insert, for example, in a ring. So if the astronomers of the Minoan civilization had some knowledge about the movements of the planets and their moons, then this information was most likely the prerogative of the elite. And when about 1450 BC, the Minoan culture suddenly perished, the accumulated knowledge disappeared with it. And among them could well be the manufacturing technology of the telescope. One day I will tell you more about ancient Crete, including my research and of course that of Ivan Yefremov, who always pointed out to its incredible secrets. I will make a special video about it, but not right now. I do want to present fascinating information from the enigmatic Russian scientist, writer, philosopher, and suspected extraterrestrial operative, Ivan Yefremov. It was the secret Soviet police that suspected him, the KGB, and had investigated him 40 volumes in his case, still classified people. There is no more USSR, but it's still classified. So what I'll give you, it's from his book, Thais of Athens, Thais Afinska in Russian. This, from the chapter where Thais meets the priests who traveled from India to meet with them in a Mesopotamian temple. And they tell her and her wise Greek companion, a sculptor of ancient knowledge, the following. Knowledge akin to good, the elder priest replied, must not be scattered about haphazardly. Akin to wealth or military power, knowledge in their own hands serves to elevate one populace and humiliate others. In addition, and this is very important, great discoveries, like the fact that the sun is a sphere circled by planets and the earth is also a sphere that hangs in space, this can destroy faith in those gods that are only created by human imagination. A wise man's knowledge will not destroy his faith in the grandeur of the world or the coherence of its laws, sensed so well by poets and artists. A fool, on the other hand, would lose any faith whatsoever and fall into a black pit of senseless animal existence. Fortunately, an ignorant man's stupidity saves the careless truth seekers. They are simply not believed, or they are laughed at, as happened with your philosopher Anaxagoras. He was the first Hellenian, ancient Greek, to teach that the sun was a fiery globe. Because of this amusing misdirection, even his great notion of nous, the universal intelligence, which overlaps with our philosophy, had no noticeable influence upon Hellenians, ancient Greeks. Even earlier than that, you had another giant of thought, Anaximander. He thought that man is the result of a long line of transformations of animals, starting with the primordial fish-like creature. He also realized the vastness of space and inhabited worlds. There was Alcmaeon, the physician and student of Pythagoras, who discovered 2 centuries ago that the brain was the organ of intelligence and the receptor of the senses. He also discovered that planets followed circular orbits. He was also ridiculed. Much of the Indian stories remained unclear to Thais and Lysippus. The enormous extent of time tracked by them from the creation of the world went entirely against the calculations of the Egyptian, Phoenicians, Hebrew, and Pythagorean scholars. The Hebrews had the shortest count of only 6,000 years. According to the Indian data, the first real people appeared on Earth 18,616,516 years ago. With the same frightening precision, the Indians had calculated the length of the dark and menacing period of troubles in the history of mankind, which started after the great battle in India 2,770 years prior, when the best of people perished. This era, or as they called it, Kali Yuga, was to last another 429,000 years. Other scholars believe it to be much shorter, the tall Indian said, only a bit over 5,000 years. Lysippus and Thais exchanged glances. Such enormous discrepancy contradicted the precision of the enormous numbers. Noting the Hellenians' confusion, the Indians continued to tell them about the precise calculations developed by their mathematicians. In the book of solar science, the time was segmented in a way with which the Hellenians were not familiar. 1 hour equaled 24 Hellenian minutes, and 1 minute of Vikala was 24 seconds. The time was further fragmented by a factor of 60, all the way down to a kashta, an unimaginably brief period of 1/300 millionth of a second. To Lysippus' question, what was the use in numbers that could be neither measured nor imagined, the Indian replied that the human mind has two stages of consciousness. At the higher stage, called buddhi, a person was capable of comprehending such small measures and understanding the structure of the world made up of the smallest particles and central forces that were eternal and undefeatable strong, despite their being mere points of energy. The Hellenians learned about the great physician Jivak, who lived 300 years before and possessed a stone that could show a body's internal organs. They also learned of another healer who protected people from smallpox by making a small scratch and rubbing it into some blood from a person who had survived the disease. Thais wanted to object, but Lysippus stopped her by gently squeezing her hand. He rose and left the Athenian alone with the Indians, then followed the familiar path to his room. He returned with a large chest made of purple amaranth wood with ornate golden corners. Having placed it carefully on the octagonal table, the sculptor opened the clasp. He revealed a strange mechanism, a combination of gears and levers of various sizes. Silver rings were marked with letters and symbols. The Indians leaned over the chest, obviously interested. A follower of the Pythagoreans, Heraclitus of Pont, who was close to Aristotle, discovered that the globe of Gaia revolves around itself akin to a top, and that its axis is stepped with respect to the plane traveled by the sun and its planets. This mechanism was built to calculate the movement of planets, without which navigation and prediction of the future could not exist. Here is someone's mind that established itself one time, having designed this mechanism to be followed by others' hands, and the tables inscribed on the cover. People who use it are free from long calculations and have time for higher pursuits. The stunned priests grew quiet. Lysippus took advantage of their dismay and said, "We Hellenians, instead of punishing the seekers of knowledge with molten lead, open wide the porticos and gardens of our academies and schools of philosophy. We're catching up with you, who started comprehending the world several thousands of years earlier." So, thousands of years later, many centuries after this meeting that Ivan Yefremov told us about, we're still trying to comprehend the world. But what magnificent description of the ancient knowledge of astronomy, of course, of other sciences, and of course, this strange mechanism. Doesn't it remind you of the Antiquity object found and being studied for a long time, an ancient computer? The ancient peoples who most surprise us with the level of knowledge of astronomy lived precisely near hot deserts. The Incas, they also had the ocean nearby for many centuries, and they had a caste of priests who professionally observed the sky. It is necessary to pay tribute to them. They not only managed to see a lot in the night sky, but also drew the right conclusions from it. They managed to understand that the stars are the same as our sun, only they are very far away, that the so-called wandering stars are not stars at all, but planets like Earth, which also revolve around the sun, and correctly placed them in their places, and also understood a lot more, Some of their data, such as the presence of a satellite at Venus and the absence of the planet Mercury at the Dogons, as well as the data of the Sumerians that Pluto is located between Saturn and Uranus, well, do not correspond to the modern structure of the solar system. But given the outstanding knowledge of astronomy of these people, the above-mentioned inconsistencies are not dismissed, but are generally perceived by modern researchers very restrained. Naturally, these ancient people are far from the only ones who had such a high level of knowledge of astronomy. We know about the Sumerians thanks to archaeologists who found their libraries of clay tablets. The Dogons still live today, although they left the places where they made their astronomical discoveries a long time ago. They themselves talk about their mythological beliefs, into which their ancient knowledge of astronomy is organically interwoven. We know about the Incas from the little information that has been preserved after the conquest by the Spaniards in the 16th century. And if we know little or nothing about such knowledge of other ancient peoples, it is only because of the lack of information that has been lost in the darkness of centuries. And finally, modern man is now showing great interest in the past times. Archaeological research is being actively conducted all over the planets, and the satellites that we put out in the orbit can help us if we only use them for this and not for war. I really hope that we will hear more than once about the great achievements of our distant ancestors, in particular in astronomy, of course. It is safe to say that the level of knowledge and skills of the ancient master craftsmen allowed them to conduct observations with a telescope, melt metal with lenses, and process materials inaccessible to understanding of modern science. I could tell you much more about the Vikings. I'll do it in other videos, especially in connection, which is important to me, to one island in the Black Sea that I had visited when I was preteen, and the permission which I took, which was given to me by archaeologists to see the underground Greek ancient city, what I saw there. Well, this island also contained remnants of the Viking presence. And I would definitely like to tell you more of Ivan Yefremov, but you will see my videos in the playlist. I will attach again its link in the description to this video, and I will continue to tell you about the knowledge that we have, the small pieces of knowledge that we have obtained about the incredible achievements of the ancient world and its vanished civilizations. Thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support me, you will find the links in the description to this video. Please tell others about my channel. I'll appreciate it. And please like my videos.